Thanks so much for joining us this evening. This is certainly one of the most unique Sharp events we've ever held, not only because this is the first time I've addressed you without wearing my signature bow tie, but also because of the unique circumstances in which we find ourselves. Over the past month, our community and our nation have faced unprecedented challenges. Within a matter of a few weeks, we've had to change our entire educational model, putting our courses and critical operations all online. We've also had to make a number of painful but necessary decisions, including postponing commencement. My heart breaks for our graduating students. It has been an immensely stressful and difficult time for us all, and I feel it acutely. I miss meeting with my mentees and other students around campus. I miss seeing my faculty and staff colleagues around the office. And I miss visiting with the members of the larger Spider community, both here in Richmond and across the country. But as much as this pandemic has taken from all of us, I try to pause each day to remember everything for which I am so grateful. As I experience the isolation of quarantine, I appreciate more than ever that it is the relationships that we have with one another, the relationships I have with all of you, that gives my work so much meaning and purpose. Today, like yesterday, I'm grateful to the Spider community for meeting this moment with both courage and compassion. And I am grateful to have the opportunity to reconnect with you, even if virtually, and have a meaningful conversation about spirituality, inclusivity, and hope in the face of this crisis. I believe it is a fitting topic to conclude this year's Sharp series, which was established in 2011 in honor of Richard L. Sharp, to address topics crucial to our nation and our world. Mr. Sharp was a nationally recognized entrepreneur and thought leader, and an exemplar of personal and professional integrity who served as a mentor to aspiring business and community leaders. Among his many professional roles, Mr. Sharp served as chairman of the board at Circuit City, CarMax, and Crocs Incorporated. Mr. Sharp was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease in late 2010, but continued to demonstrate his values of leading by example and making the world a better place until his untimely death in 2014. The university celebrates its commitment to Mr. Sharp's vision by fostering important dialogues that challenge us to think critically about the many pressing issues of our time. I'm now pleased to welcome my colleague and university chaplain, Reverend Dr. Craig Coker, to our virtual stage to introduce tonight's thought leader. Craig.
Thank you, President Crutcher, and thank you for the leadership that you have offered to the university during these challenging times. I hope that you and Dr. Betty Neal Crutcher and your entire family are and remain well. We are so fortunate to have Dr. Eboo Patel with us this evening. Eboo Patel is the founder and CEO of the Interfaith Youth Core and a sought-after thought leader in a host of areas, namely interfaith engagement and the promise of a civil society. He's written a wide range of books on the subject, was named to President Obama's Inaugural Faith Council, and holds a doctorate in the sociology of religion from Oxford University, where he studied on a Rhodes Scholarship. We've been fortunate to have Eboo Patel to the University of Richmond before as keynote speaker for our MLK celebration and as keynote speaker for our Weinstein-Rosenthal Forum. And we are so fortunate to have him join us again tonight in this virtual way. Over the course of the next 50 minutes or so, I'm going to have a conversation with Eboo Patel about the challenges we face individually and collectively, and about how our spiritual traditions can help guide our path. We'll end with a story of hope that perhaps will serve as an inspiration for all of us. So as we join together tonight in Richmond and far beyond, I'm so glad that you are here. Perhaps we will find some sense of connection and solace together. I could go on about Eboo's life journey and the extraordinary impact that he has had on young people. How much better, though, to hear him tell his own story.
When I was in college, I was, well, wandering. Some people might describe it as being lost, but that doesn't seem like quite the right word. I knew what I wanted, at least some of what I wanted, but it was hard to articulate. There were things I was angry about, a lot of things actually, but being angry just made me feel worse and didn't seem to make the world better. There were ways I wanted to help, but anything I did just seemed small. And so, the wandering. One day, I was talking to a professor when I blurted out my big, wet, ugly jumble of feelings in one fell swoop. She said a sentence that wound up changing everything. Have you ever heard of Dorothy Day? I hadn't, so I checked some books out of the library. What I read rocked my world. Dorothy Day had gone through lots of wandering. She'd lived different places, worked as a writer, had nights of legendary drinking with artists, given birth to a child. During the pandemic of 1918, Dorothy Day served as a probationary nurse at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn. She worked 12-hour shifts nearly every day for a year, tending to patients who were ill, too often wrapping them in sheets, preparing them for the morgue. The experience nearly broke her, but it also awakened her. She had heard a call to service. She recognized herself performing a sacrament of duty. But where had the call come from? What force had given the simple act of serving one person a broader cosmic significance? The experience brought her to faith, committed her to service, and inspired her to create. She founded something called the Catholic Worker House of Hospitality so that other people could do the same. She called it a space where it was easier to be good. It turned out that so many people wanted this that the Catholic Worker became a movement. There happened to be a Catholic Worker House of Hospitality in my college town, and one night I went to volunteer there. What I experienced changed my life. These people actually lived what they talked about. They didn't just serve people in need, they built community with them. And they didn't act like they were impressed with themselves. They just went about their day as if a life totally committed to the service of others was the most natural thing in the world. When I asked them why they did what they did, they answered with a simple sentence and a slight shrug. This is how God would have us live. I spent the summer after my second year in college living and serving in Catholic worker houses. I loved being part of the soup kitchens. I loved talking to people for whom human connection was a cure. I felt comforted by the songs, the rituals, the prayers. I didn't really feel a call to be Catholic, but I so admired the way that their faith anchored them in something that was bigger than themselves. Part 2. I kept wandering. And I just so happened to wander into a poet named Kevin Colville. We were about the same age. Kevin was wandering too, and he had a lot of the same feelings as me, but he was better at putting them into words. I guess that's what poets do. Kevin also had something else, a mentor, a professor named Wayne Teasdale. In addition to teaching theology, mysticism, and world religions, Professor Teasdale was a Catholic monk. We called him Brother Wayne. Brother Wayne talked about religion a lot. He knew things about every faith, and he said that the thread that connected all of them was love, and that love was applied by serving others through acts of kindness. He would quote Martin Luther King Jr. on this. The Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist belief is that love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality. And everybody can be great because anybody can serve. Brother Wayne had a hope for Kevin and me, that we would be part of a movement of young people of different identities who cooperated together to serve others. We said that we would happily join such a movement, but we didn't know of one. Brother Wayne looked a little sad, and then he shrugged and said, well, if you can't find one, you should start one. Brother Wayne had a friend that he thought would encourage us. His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He made a few phone calls. An audience was arranged at the Dalai Lama's residence in Dharamsala, India. Kevin and I worked all spring to earn the money for a plane ticket. Come July of 1998, we were off. Part 3. The journey to Dharamsala involved buses, trains, and lots of rickshaws. The whole time I read about Buddhism and tried to do Buddhist meditation. I was excited to tell His Holiness that I had chosen the path of his faith. The only problem was that every time I closed my eyes and crossed my legs just so, instead of being able to focus on emptiness like all the books on Buddhism counseled, the Shia Muslim mantra that my mother taught me as a child, Ya Ali, Ya Muhammad, Ya Ali, Ya Muhammad, kept coming into my mind. I tried to push it out, but it kept returning. Finally, I just let it stay. I figured that whatever divinity there might be would see past the Muslim packaging into the true Buddhist nature of my soul. When we entered the Dalai Lama's receiving room, the first thing he did was to touch the chain around my friend Kevin's neck. It had a pendant of a small empty cup. Emptiness, the Dalai Lama giggled. I like this. The Dalai Lama and Kevin commenced a conversation about the concept of emptiness in Judaism and the significance of emptiness in Buddhism. I sat there marveling at this. My friend was having a theological dialogue with the Dalai Lama. And then His Holiness turned to me. I wound myself up to tell him all about my deciding to become a Buddhist, but he spoke first. You're a Muslim, he said. It wasn't a question, more like a statement, maybe even a declaration. I stammered, well, I've been trying this form of Buddhist meditation that I'm trying to get better at it. You're a Muslim, the Dalai Lama declared again. Had Brother Wayne told him? Had he snuck into my mind as I meditated? Did Dalai Lamas just know things? You're a Muslim, he said a third time. This one sounded like an invitation. I just kind of nodded. Part 4. I should probably say at this point, I was born in India. I came to the United States when I was 2 years old. I still have lots of family that lives in the city of Mumbai. When we first arrived, Kevin and I had stayed with my grandmother for a short while. After our audience with the Dalai Lama, we went back to my grandmother's house and found a new woman staying there. She wasn't a relative, and she didn't strike me as a family friend. When I asked who the woman was, my grandmother said that she was being abused at home, and so she would be staying with us for a while. We would keep her safe. I started to shake my head. I don't think that's such a good idea. I mean, what if the people who were hurting her try to hurt us? I think you should send her away. My grandmother gave me her famous arched eyebrows look, the one that I remember receiving a lot as a child. She padded over to a wooden cupboard and took out an old shoebox. I've been doing this for 50 years, she said softly, and handed me the shoebox. Inside were dozens and dozens of Polaroids of women with notes attached, the stories of how these women had heard that my grandmother, Ashraf Maji, would take girls from all over India who were being hurt into her home and help them to a better life. I read 5, 7, 10, 12, 15 of these stories. I wanted to hear one more. My grandmother's. Mama, why do you do this? She shrugged. Oh, beta, she said. This is just what we Muslims do. Something clicked for me. The angry wandering, the conversations with Kevin, the walks with Brother Wayne, the audience with the Dalai Lama, those months I had spent at Catholic worker houses, marveling at the way they served others, those nights I had stayed up late reading the work of Dorothy Day. My grandmother was a Muslim Dorothy Day. She had run a Muslim house of hospitality out of her apartment in Mumbai for 50 years. This cosmic anchoring had been with me all along. The question of who I was after years and years of wandering, felt settled. I was a Muslim. I couldn't remove the prayers from my soul even when I tried. But what would I do with that? To paraphrase the poet T.S. Eliot, we do not inherit traditions. We work to make ourselves worthy of them. What do any of us do with the time we are given, with the traditions of our ancestors, with the historical moment we are born into, with our wanderings and our wounds? I take comfort in the answers supplied by Dorothy Day and my grandmother, the Dalai Lama and Brother Wayne, not so much with their words, but with their lives. Anchor yourself, find friends, serve strangers, be good, and create spaces where others can be good with you.
Eboo, thank you for sharing so thoughtfully about the story that you've been on, especially the early part of that story and how it's led you in some sense to where you are today. I wonder as we get into this conversation, given we're dispersed, oh gosh, we're dispersed and the people who are with us are dispersed. Where are you right now and where are you speaking to us from?
I am speaking to you from the basement of my home on the north side of Chicago, about 2 miles from Wrigley Field.
I wonder, as you speak to us from your home on the north side of Chicago, reflecting on that journey that you just shared with us that helped lead you to some sense of home. As part of that journey, you talked about people who have been important in your life, people who have helped shape who you are. Dorothy Day, the Dalai Lama, Brother Wayne, your grandmother, no doubt there are many others. We're in this extraordinary time. I wonder, who are the guides that we should be looking towards right now in this time?
I'm so struck by people who, like 6 weeks ago, were just folks who would put on their scrubs to begin their shift as a nurse or a respiratory therapist, or somebody who worked in a hospital, was a custodian or a doctor or a receptionist, and they're still going to work. They're still putting on those scrubs, but they're doing it at great risk to themselves, and they know that they're keeping a nation running. And I just think that this transformation from ordinary to remarkable, even when the activity is the same, I just find that really powerful. And it makes me think that, anything that we do, right? If you're a coach, if you babysit kids, if you preach on Sundays, if you lead Juma prayers on Fridays, or even participate in Juma prayers, right now that might just seem pedestrian. And there might be a day when it's actually extraordinary and remarkable. And it's, I think, useful to reflect on what is it that inspires us to do the work that we do now, and what will give us strength and solace when that work becomes hard and risky and necessary.
In your reflection, and if you're just joining us, I can kind of monitor our participants, and so I know we've had some people log on as our webinar has begun. My name's Craig Coker. I'm the university chaplain here at the University of Richmond, and I'm in my office on campus, and I'm speaking to Eboo Patel, who's in Chicago and is the CEO and founder of the Interfaith Youth Core. You spoke in your reflection about anchors. That was one of the themes that came out of your anchors, your reflection. I wonder, how do we find anchors? It feels like the seas right now are so stormy. The water just unbelievably choppy every day. How do we find anchors? And what are those? How can those anchors help us?
I think that as I tried to illuminate in my story, that my anchors had been with me all along, right? These Shia Muslim prayers, My grandmother, who I remember as a child being the person who said I should pray more and skateboard less. They'd been with me all along. It just took different kinds of moments in my life to make me recognize the power of those anchors. And so it wasn't that I didn't have anchors. It was just that I didn't have the eyes to see them. And that's one of the things I think is perhaps powerful about this moment. It's got to shake you into having new eyes. And can those new eyes see, in addition to the crisis, can they see the rising, right? And after 9/11, Bruce Springsteen does this unbelievable album called The Rising. And I've been listening to it a lot recently. You know, he's talking about the firefighters and the police officers and the first responders who rush into the World Trade Center when everybody else is rushing out. And he says, may your strength give us strength. May your hope give us hope. May your faith give us faith. May your love give us love. Right. And I think to myself, I will never look at a nurse or a respiratory therapist or a custodian the same way again. New eyes, right? And at one point in my life, there were moments that shook me into having new eyes about the anchors that had been with me all along. And now I'm being shaken into new eyes on what I think is essential and remarkable and necessary.
Thank you. I think about similar kinds of people, the people you see at the grocery store, the mail carrier who keeps coming, every day bringing the mail. And then, I think about my brother, who's an ER physician, facing things that he's trained for, but facing things that he has never experienced at this level, as all of our healthcare workers are. How do we, you talk about, in your story, you talk a lot about love. Brother Wayne tells you that love is the key. You talked about searching for threads of love. I think we're all looking for love, always, maybe right now for sure. How do we find a love that feels real and strong, that doesn't sort of get washed away with sentimentality?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the love that keeps you persevering when sentimentality won't, right? So Bonhoeffer distinguished between cheap grace and costly grace, right? And what gives him a moral compass in it during great risk to himself in Nazi Germany, right? What gives him what love motivates him to stand up after a particularly ugly foray of Nazis into Jewish neighborhoods and say on German radio, those who did not stand up for the Jews do not deserve to sing Gregorian chants, right? That is love that inspires him to make a statement like that, but it is not sentimentality. And I think there are lots of people right now who are discovering just how strong they are. And I had the chance to visit with your class earlier today, Reverend Coker, and one of the things I shared was every single one of you, if you worked in a hospital, you keep on showing up for work. And I would trust you with my life. And my question for you is, what would give you the strength to do that? Because I don't doubt that you would. My question for you is, what would give you the strength to be a hero, to be remarkable when it is required of you? Because I know you'll do it. I think that this is one of the times when all these ordinary people are becoming remarkable, right? And 6 weeks ago, they were ordinary. And God, I hope to God that 6 months from now, they will be ordinary, right? And right now, they're not. And they are tapping into some deep well of love in themselves. It exists in all of us. I believe it comes from God, the breath of God. As a Muslim, you could believe something else. You just got to know where it comes from for you, and you got to be able to touch it when you need it.
I was talking to some students this past week, and it said, where do you find hope? Where do you find strength? And one of our Jewish students shared about how gathering virtually for a Passover Seder to retell the story of slavery to freedom, and to think about that Passover story in the context of COVID-19, or thinking about leading a virtual Easter service. I'd never done that before, but we were leading a virtual Easter service and thinking about the story of the resurrection in the context of COVID-19. What what is the role? I mean, you spend your entire life thinking about religious communities and bringing religious communities into the public sphere in ways that are hopeful and positive and serve the common good. What is the role of religious communities right now in our society?
So I think one of the ways we see the role is in what the communities themselves are doing, like Passover and Easter Seder and Juma prayers online. I think that, there's not a lot of religious communities who were accustomed to doing that 8 weeks ago, and they have transformed very quickly. And those of us who have some sense of being on the inside of religious communities know just how big of a lift that was, both physically, but also kind of as far as paradigm shift goes. It's also not surprising at all to me to see big church parking lots being turned into drive-in testing centers. It's for COVID. It's not surprising to me to know that the volunteers from religious communities are the ones who continue to show up at food banks. That a Muslim group called Celebrate Mercy has raised hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to people who have been hurt by what's going on. That is in effect what we come to expect. I think the thing that has moved me to tears, not that it surprises me, but it just moves me, is that people who go to the hospital with this disease have to go alone, and not all of them come out. And these teams of nurses and anesthesiologists and emergency physicians and people who were trained to do arm surgery and now are doing intubations, they're the ones who are around these patients. And that team of medical practitioners and custodians and receptionists, the entire team. You might have a physician who is a Jehovah's Witness working with an anesthesiologist who's a Baptist, who's got a nurse helping them, who's Jewish, who is being aided by a Muslim respiratory therapist in a room that's been sterilized by an atheist at a hospital that was started by a Catholic religious order, and that is being run by a Jain or a Baha'i. Mm-hmm. American healthcare is the most inspiring example of interfaith cooperation in the world, and it was before the pandemic. But right now, those people, they're the last people that some human beings see. And I just imagine a Muslim physician who notices that her patient has a cross around his neck as he is passing away, and she tries to fashion from her knowledge of the Islamic faith, the janazah prayer, some semblance of last rites for this patient with a cross around his neck. I find that to be interfaith leadership in the most profound and moving way, and nobody prepares for that. Nobody prepares for that. But when you're in that position, you do it. You find that you have the strength to do it. And I just am so moved by that.
Indeed. Me too. I appreciated what you shared with many of the students that you met with earlier today, throughout the day. Again, virtually, we're trying to figure out how to do that and communicate with one another on screens and sort of give students, young people, a confidence that one day they too will be in some circumstance like that they too will be the person in that room, or if not in that particular room in the hospital, in some other setting where there will be some great strength called forth from them to respond. Wonder, what is the counsel, those of us who are a little farther along in life, we've had some life experiences, maybe we've gone through some difficult things before that help prepare us a little bit for what we're experiencing now. But many young people, maybe they haven't gone through that. What kind of counsel do you give to young people right now as they go through this bewildering time?
Yeah. Reverend Croker, I was so struck by what several of the athletes in your leadership class said today. And they basically said, look, we prepare for the hardest situations, right? One of the athletes said, student athletes, because in that class, they were exceptional students. One of the student athletes said, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Another talked about visualizing the most challenging situation you can imagine on the field and persevering and getting to victory. Another said, I sit by my locker and I think about scenario after scenario and what I would do. And part of what we're witnessing right now is a scenario where a whole lot of people are heading into the fire every day wearing scrubs or wearing the uniform of postal workers and city workers and grocery workers. And they have found the strength within them. When you look at that and you think to yourself, so that's what it looks, that is a version of being on the free throw line with 2 seconds left, down 1 point in opposing arena. And I'm preparing for the moment when I need to hit those 2 free throws. What does it look like to prepare for the moment when you need to enter the healthcare facility and save lives at some risk to your own? Because crises are going to come, right? Every 5 or 10 years, there is a once in a century crisis. Who are we going to be in that crisis? And for me, the kind of best metaphor is a pilot. I love kind of asking the question / telling the story. How many of you have been on a plane that is experiencing turbulence and everybody's hand goes up? And then I ask, how many of you have heard a pilot's voice coming over the intercom, wavering and freaking out? And nobody's hand goes up because pilots never do that. Doesn't matter if they are actually freaking out or wavering. When their voice comes over the intercom, they are communicating. I am in charge. Remain calm. We are a community. Trust me. We are going to get to our destination together. That's what a leader sounds like. That's the effect a leader has on a group of people who 5 minutes ago were thinking 300 disparate thoughts and now actually feel like a community. So what does it look like to be that metaphorical pilot in any crisis, including this one?
Thank you. And, as I hear you talk and we use sports metaphors and the metaphors of being on a plane, and I know both you and I are both Michael Jordan fans because I went to UNC Chapel Hill and I grew up in Chapel Hill, and you grew up in Chicago. There are all these kind of stories from our past, whether sports stories or stories that maybe we've experienced on a plane in the midst of turbulence that can be helpful. Are there religious stories that you think, as you think about the traditions that you're involved in, are there religious narratives that can give us some guidance and counsel right now?
Yeah, thank you. That's such a great question. So if you and your students and the Spider community has seen the film Selma,
yeah,
right? The film about Martin Luther King Jr. The thing I love about that film is it's not all big speeches and Nobel Prizes and visits to the White House, right? There's King at midnight, despondent, and he calls Mahalia Jackson and he says, "Sing me a gospel song." There's King on one side of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, looking across a bridge at 300 truncheons waiting for his head. And you can see the fear in his eyes, and he kneels and he prays. And you watch it and think to yourself, boy, this man needed that prayer. This is not a show. This is not sentimentality. This is like, he is like drinking from the straw of faith because he is putting himself at risk. And so I think about those images. I think about the image of the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of God be with him, at Hudaybiyah, in a famous Muslim story in which the Prophet returns to Mecca as a pilgrim and not a warrior. And through a variety of remarkable creative moves, winds up welcoming this vast majority of people who had very recently been in battle with him, winds up welcoming them into his community because they want the love and the generosity that he represents. So I think that faith traditions actually, they supply us with example after example, story after story of people who have found this kind of overwhelming sense of love and strength, and it guides their actions, and it keeps them upright in times that are just unfathomable to most of us.
Yeah, thank you. One of the kind of core ethics that guides our tradition is this kind of ethic of love. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, a sense that we who are in these religious stories and traditions have some moral responsibility to serve our neighbor, to help our neighbor. I wonder what's your sense of how we respond, how we navigate, manage the kind of inequities that get exposed through a crisis like this, within that context of what does it mean to love our neighbor when, it's hard to even talk to our neighbors right now, let alone figure out how to love somebody who's our neighbor who may be going through an incredibly difficult time, not just personally, but because of the issues of justice and inequality that we deal with as a society.
One of your students said something so wise in one of the sessions earlier. She said, I've been reconnecting with my high school friends, and I've actually been reconnecting with the people who I didn't talk with a whole lot in high school. And I'm finding myself doing that deliberately. I'm finding myself intentionally reaching into the outer circles of my acquaintances and giving strength and love to those circles. And I think to myself, we all have an inner circle, and that circle gives us love, and it radiates calm, and we give them love and radiate calm. But it's an interesting image to think, what does it look like to start with our outer circles? What does it look like to wake up in the morning and to say, the person that I would kind of give a half head nod to in the high school, in the hallways in high school? What does it look like to reach out and to communicate with that person? The senior citizen that I visited once when I was in my junior year in high school, what's it look like to give her a call right now? And these are little things, but they matter a lot. And I think that that's one of the things about this moment, is that little things matter a lot right now. And so if you can do 4, 5, 6 little things, it's going to make a big difference right now.
Mm-hmm. There's going to be a time, I don't know when it'll be, earlier, in the day's conversations, you asked our students to imagine July 2021 or 2022, there'll be a time when it feels like there's some resumption of a normal world. How do you imagine, I'm thinking about sort of religious leadership right now, or maybe leadership more broadly. What does it mean to live now in the midst of what we're experiencing fully, and yet also try to imagine what that day will be and prepare for that day when it comes, that will look more akin to what we had known before?
Yeah. So at IFYC, we're talking about this as, what is a better new normal? Or how do we make the day after better? And one of the things about these moments is that they are wet cement moments, and they're shapeable. And so what does it look like to kind of get your hands into this moment and say, when we get to the other side, I want the world to look like this. And for those of us who have the luxury and the privilege to do that, and I'm happy to confess I'm one of those. There's a roof over my head. There's food on my table. I feel enormously blessed. I also feel a responsibility to say, when this ship gets through these rocky waters and gets to the other side, I want this better new normal to be more equitable. I want this crisis to make us more inclusive. One of the reasons that, to just offer a quick reference point from history, for a long time, the United States conceived of itself as a Protestant nation. And right. That story actually changes in World War II, because Jews and Catholics and Protestants are fighting together. And there's actually a moment in World War II known as the Four Chaplains moment, when aboard the USS Dorchester, a mainline Protestant and evangelical Protestant a Catholic priest, and a Jewish rabbi give up their life jackets. These are the 4 chaplains on board, give up their life jackets to sailors after their ship is hit by a Nazi U-boat. And they go down with the ship, arm in arm, whispering the final prayers of their faith. And that becomes the symbol for a totally invented term, Judeo-Christian nation. The crisis that was World War II helped make America more inclusive. Can the crisis that is COVID-19 give us new eyes on what happens every day in our hospitals? Jews and Muslims, Baptists and atheists, Jehovah's Witnesses and Baha'is, Buddhists and Jains, Catholics and Protestants working together to save lives. And can we start thinking of ourselves as an interfaith nation?
You know, I appreciate the World War II reference. It's, not surprising that it's some of the language that we've been hearing is thinking about this as the front lines and the war and the story you tell. There's an incredibly powerful one. You know, the image that's coming to me that's been helpful for me to think about is to think about all those English citizens at Dunkirk. And the British armies across the English Channel and threatened by annihilation. And there's no big organized strategy to fix that. It wasn't D-Day. It's just a whole bunch of people got into some boats and they figured out a way to row over there and row the army back. And it strikes me that maybe what we're experiencing right now is we're all at Dunkirk, trying to figure out how do we get in our boats? What can we do to serve some larger cause, even as it's not completely orchestrated, simply because we're living in such a chaotic time. I wonder, are there other maybe metaphors that have been helpful to you to help kind of as a leader, to help work with your staff and your teams, or to help organize in your mind what it's like to live through these days?
I think the story that I reference about Dorothy Day in my spiritual autobiography is very instructive to me right now, because Dorothy Day, during the pandemic of 1918, which is the closest reference point that we have to what's happening right now, she's 21 years old, and she is not a trained medical professional. She just volunteers, and she volunteers at this hospital in Brooklyn, 12-hour shifts, and it nearly breaks her. And it also awakens her, but not in ways that are immediately known to her, right? So she feels this kind of immediate call to service, and she follows the call, and she follows that call into a really difficult place. And then 15 years later, she founds the Catholic Worker Movement. It's actually 15 years later that she converts to Catholicism. And I find that actually a really powerful kind of story, because there's this immediate call to service that Dorothy Day feels and follows, but it's not until 15 years later that the kind of fruits of that planting begin to ripen, and where a kind of coherence sets into Dorothy Day's life, and where she finds the anchor for herself, which is the Catholic faith, and where she finds the work of her life, which is the Catholic Worker Movement. And so I think part of what's happening now is like at Dunkirk, there's a lot of people feeling a call to do something. And like at Dunkirk, they just gotten literally boats. I saw the film too. It was really inspiring. They literally got in boats, stiff upper lip British style. I lived there for 3.5 years. I know all about that, right?
That's right.
And they just were like, I'm going to help. Dorothy Day was like, I am going to help. And she couldn't quite figure out the broader, coherent meaning of it until one day she did. And so I would say, if you're feeling like a call to service, follow that call. And it might not be part of a grand strategy right now, but there's probably an awful lot of grace that fills that call. And there's probably an awful lot of goodness you will feel and you will give by following it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. I've been thinking about the role of friendship. You and I were talking earlier, and I commented that as I was thinking about this evening or today, I think the first time we met was 17 years ago, and You had come to Duke University, where I was serving at the time, and you were really launching this Interfaith Youth Core, and our lives have intersected many times since, and you've gone on, just to have this extraordinary impact on interfaith work more broadly. I wonder, how do you sort of imagine the role of, friendship? I'm thinking about your friendship with Brother Wayne, your friendship with Kevin, friendships that may be, I was texting with a childhood friend today that I don't communicate with all that often, but the texting seems so rich. How do you imagine the role of friendship in what we're experiencing right now, and how might that be one of the guides that could lead us forward?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I'm about to tell you more about myself than you all might want to hear. But I heard from an old high school friend. It's literally 25 years since we've talked, and he said, "Remember when we used to listen to Kiss Destroyer together, and the song of that album, King of the Nighttime World, and we used to watch the Oakland Raiders play together?" He's like, "The Raiders are still my second favorite team." And I'm telling you, man, like, whatever other meetings I had that day and whatever grants I was trying to negotiate, and I was putting together the script for this, like that was like the candle glow of my day, right? Like thinking about listening to Kiss Destroyer on my Sony Walkman, not even a Discman, back in 1989, right? Like an ugly old tape recorder thing. And like those memories and those friendships, they like, may we reconnect, right? Like I remember, I don't know, like mid-March, I was mad at a handful of people for some stupid reason. And this COVID, the pandemic hits and the closure start. And I just got on the phone. I called like 6 people in a row, and I'm like, I don't remember why I was mad at you, but it wasn't a good enough reason to not let you know that I love you. Right? And just like all the people who defriended each other, over politics these last few years, man, I hope you're friends again.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not that politics doesn't matter. It matters more than ever, but nothing matters like friendship.
Yeah.
Nothing.
It reminds me of Augustine's vision of friendship as the highest of all virtues, that somehow all the other virtues are connected to deep and abiding friendships that last over time. We're moving towards the end of our time. I wonder, what's the thing that maybe you'd like to share that you haven't had a chance to share, or the question I should have asked you, but I haven't had a chance to ask you yet, before we move into the closing piece? Any reflections on what you'd like to share there?
Yeah, I want to repeat something that I have said earlier in this conversation, and also that I said to your students. And I want people to like feel this really deeply, right? That when Gandalf comes to your door and says, "Hey, Bilbo, you're the ring bearer. You got to lead us because there's nobody else," you'll be up to the challenge, right? Like if you were a doctor in an emergency room right now, or if you were a nurse, or you're a respiratory therapist, or a postal worker, or and some of you on this, you're preparing for that, or you are that, you will be up to the challenge. And I think the question is, what will give you strength during that time? And how do you build that strength up now? This is one of the most beautiful things about human beings, is we do the things we never thought we could do all the time. We have this strength in us that I believe God gives to us with his breath. Other people believe different things. I think that that's beautiful too. Where are you going to find your strength when you need it? Because I know that you will stand upright and walk in to the room where you are needed. What will give you the strength to keep doing that?
It's beautiful. Well, look, as we near the end of our time together, I want to thank so many people who have helped to organize this, to President Crutcher and his staff for the event tonight and the Sharp series throughout the year, to our remarkable tech team, who helped pull this together, and to you, Dr. Patel, for your wonderful wisdom and for trying something new with us tonight, being imaginative, creative. We're so grateful to you and for visiting with our students throughout the day and the words of wisdom that you offered to them. I wonder, perhaps the place to end is to end on hope, a postage stamp of hope. Eboo, will you please share with us once more?
I call this piece COVID Dance. My wife's parents live in a suburb just northwest of Chicago called Skokie. It's pretty diverse, a microcosm of the world. They're in their 70s and have had some medical challenges over the past few years, putting them in a vulnerable category during the COVID pandemic. My wife and kids and I have been driving to see them every week or so. We stand on the front lawn and they open the window and we exchange greetings and well wishes through the screen. The last time we went, I heard Arabic prayers in the background, surahs from the Quran. We're all Muslim, although not all of us are ritualistic. Yet, for all of us, hearing the lilting sound of those prayers gave us such a deep feeling of comfort and ease. We have them playing continuously, my mother-in-law said. They are our solace. This is a time for solace, I said. What are you doing for exercise? My wife inquired as our two boys chased each other through the front yard, clearly getting their exercise. My father-in-law pointed across the street and said, there is a Jewish family that lives there, and every night at 7:30 p.m., we come to our respective windows and we dance together. Sometimes we lead, and sometimes they lead. That's our exercise and our fun and our companionship, my mother-in-law said. Then she added, I wonder if they have recordings of the prayers from their religion playing in their house. I wonder what they sound like. I wonder if it's giving them solace the way our prayers give us solace. Jazakallahu khair. May God give you goodness.
To all of you who have joined us tonight, thank you so much for being with us. But as we part, I wonder, where are you getting your solace? How are you connecting with others? What is the dance that inspires you right now? Grace and peace to you. May God bless you now and always. Good night.